"Mommy, look, I found something," shouted little Carla at the sight of what appeared to be a man's foot sticking out near the bank of Yellowstone River. "Come quick," she shouted again, as the algae surrounding the foot began to dissipate, and various kinds of fish could be seen schooling around the body. Authorities were called immediately, and the body was pulled up onto the bank. It was 36-year-old Justin Hammond. His hollow, eyeless gaze stared into the camera lens as photo after photo was taken of what was left of his distorted body. His lower jaw was missing, his pale, white, clammy skin covering his naked, mutilated body. His left leg was gone up to the knee, and his penis was removed. Something sinister happened to Justin, something nightmarish. But even more was what was in store for Julia and Robert Patterson, only a few miles down the river that very same fall. What's up, guys? Iceman here. So what you're about to witness is an absolutely horrifying bear attack, and I warn you, it's nightmarish. But before I get into it, I'd like to thank you all for your support on this channel. And if you will, like the video, subscribe to the page, and pull that bell so you're notified next time I post a video. And blessings to my patrons. Links in the description below. Also, I'm not a bot, like a lot of these channels are, so like the video for the sake of humanity. And let's get into this chilling tale. Julia had long red hair that went down to her knees, and her skin was white as snow. She was raised in a Mennonite community, but upon meeting Robert, left the community in pursuit of a more modern lifestyle. Robert was a biker and worked a bar, serving drinks and busting tables. After 2 years of living in sin, Robert proposed to the young woman, partly to appease the family she had left in hopes of making amends. Their honeymoon to Yellowstone was filled with awe and wonder, but suddenly took a turn for the worse. Not far from the campsite, a young man was trampled to death by a bull moose. Apparently, he was trying to take a selfie with the moose not far behind him in the background, and the creature charged the unsuspecting victim. It rammed him with its antlers and brought the man to the ground and began digging the antlers into his upper body and face, gashing gaping wounds across his flesh. Its 2,500-pound body of sheer muscle and mass trampled over the man's carcass, stomping into his abdomen region and crotch, flattening his guts until it was stomping not into flesh, but the dirt beneath it. The man's eyes fearfully gazed into the creature's soulless black holes, otherwise known as pupils, as his body was destroyed and his soul left him that very hour. This horrid scene struck fear throughout the campsite and the greater regions surrounding Yellowstone, but wasn't enough for Julia and Robert to cancel their honeymoon plans. The first night went as planned: acutely burnt hot dogs over the fire pit, some late-night laughs, and a cozy night's sleep under the star-filled October sky. It wasn't until the following morning where Robert wandered off in pursuit of a gray owl, while Julia stayed at the campsite to make breakfast. Then horror struck. He was sure to bring bear spray on his birdwatching pursuit, but wasn't prepared for what nature had in store. The bear came barreling out of the woodwork. Robert had no time to react before being pummeled to the ground and mauled viciously. He couldn't feel the initial few chomps, as his body was numb from the massive hit he took, which felt similarly to being hit by a truck. He found himself on his belly, with the giant monster towering over him. Jaws clung to his shoulder. It jolted him side to side, thrashing him around like a rag doll. The man groaned in horror as the bear began digging its long, yellow, bacteria-reddened claws into his upper back. But something was off. Something curious. It seemed as though the bear was mauling him out of obligation rather than predation. It would stop, lift up its head, and pan the area nervously, only to continue its deadly endeavor. And there at the corner of his eye, Robert noticed a small cub looking on at the edge of the forest, only 20 yards away or so. The poor animal was anxious and whining for its mother as she dug into the helpless man. Robert, still on his belly, with the grizzly atop him, managed to grab hold of his bear spray can and unlatch it from his pants loop. He held it behind his head and sprayed once, but it was useless, as the stream shot in the wrong direction and only irritated the two, with some of the mace getting into Robert's own eyes. Still clutching to the can, Robert cusped his hands behind his neck as a last-ditch effort to protect the vulnerable area. The bear relentlessly dug into him, as though it was angered at Robert's attempt to protect himself. It felt threatened. It clamped its jaws around his bleeding hand and squeezed down like a vice grip. But that's when the seemingly miraculous occurrence took place. Upon crushing Robert's hand, the bear's jaws also pierced the can of mace, causing a seeming explosion of the pepper gas to engulf the area. The bear choked and huffed and let the man go, and began rubbing its face into Robert's mangled backside. It got off of him and began dragging its face on the dirt and grass beneath it, as though it were trying to rid the irritation from its eyes. It then lifted its massive skull and noticed its young, still looking on to the vicious scene. It looked back to Robert and then back to its cub, and then, in a moment's time, in the twinkling of an eye, it was gone. Robert lay there desolate, alone, ruined. He blacked out from the pain and blood gushing from his shoulder and chest. He was sure he was dead. He awakened to the sound of birds chirping in the midst and found it within himself to begin crawling back to the campsite where his newlywed reside. Julia had already gone out looking for Robert, concerned of his whereabouts, as breakfast was long ready. She found his mangled carcass about 300 yards from their camp and noticed a fearful mother grizzly and her cub not far out in the field beyond, nervously pacing back and forth as if it were concerned, its rigid musculature to its body swaying as it tranced back and forth. Julia grabbed Robert by his ankle and began dragging him back to the camp, his bloodied body weigh heavy as she heaved and pulled, Robert moaning and gurgling sounds coming from the man's deep crevices. The woman finally made it to the campsite and immediately called for an airlift, and he was flown to Yellowstone Medical Center. Miraculously, Robert survived the vicious bear attack and came out with a bloodied forehead, scathed eye, broken elbow, and torn up midsection. Upon his request, the mother grizzly bear was spared, as he felt deeply that he provoked the animal unintentionally, but provoked it nonetheless. Julia was terrified from the incident and refused to ever go camping again in Yellowstone. Jeez, what do you guys think about that bear attack story? It's crazy how this isn't the first one that I've covered where a guy was out in the woods with bear spray, and yet he just wasn't quite able to react in time. It just goes to show how majestic and stealthy these creatures can really be. I remember when I was in the forests of Tennessee, I picked up a big heavy stick because I knew there were bears in the area and I even saw a couple of them. But I made sure to be on the lookout all the time. But even with that being said, I just don't know if you can ever be too ready. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about this bear attack? What could have been done differently to avoid the attack? It doesn't seem like he had a hand cannon on him, and neither did Julia. They just had the old can of pepper spray. But nonetheless, it was very, very fortunate that the mother bear bit into the can and basically deterred herself by mistake. But it's also interesting how whenever I see a mother bear attack somebody, it really does seem as though they're just doing it out of obligation and they don't really want to be doing it. It's like they're in such a hurry just to neutralize the target. So I guess it probably is important to play dead in those types of situations, because she really just wants the threat to be gone and then she can get on with her life. But nonetheless, I look forward to hearing what you all have to say about this in the comments below. And again, if you will like this video, subscribe to the page, become a patron if you want to support me further, and I'll see you soon with more chilling tales from the Iceman.